Of Business Morning on Channels Television. We're broadcasting live from Lagos, Nigeria. Well, today on the program, we're going to be looking at the Central Bank of Nigeria's second quarter report and how it's going to be affecting how economic variables actually turn out in the near to distant future. And I have here with me in the studio economic analyst Wale Oluwe. Thank you so much for joining us on the program this morning.
Thank you for having me, Harriet.
Well, the CBN actually released this result last week, and so we had a couple of days to digest this information. What are your thoughts as regards, the report?
I would say it's mixed.
Okay.
It's mixed because if you look at the report, it is segmented into four major areas. The financial sector, the fiscal sector, the risk sector, and the external sector. Now, you've had very negative news in some instances, then some good news in some other areas. Let me start with the fiscal sector.
But just before you go into that, did the good news outweigh the bad news?
I think the bad news outweighed the good news, unfortunately for Nigeria, in this quota that just ended. Right. But it's not a completely bad thing.
Okay.
Because, it's the second quarter, so we expect first quarter to be slow, second quarter to pick up, then third quarter to get to the peak of the activities. Then you start seeing the slowdown in the fourth quarter. But the ones that didn't give us positive news are the ones that should have given us positive news, really.
Okay.
Because on the positive note, you have the GDP grew marginally from about, let's say, 6.6 to 6.7. That is good news. Then the second good news is that inflation, declined from 8.6% to 8.4%.
8.4%.
But by the time you come to the fiscal side, it's not a good news.
Well, just before we get to all of that, let's still talking about the fiscal side. We see that the spread between lending and deposit rates, according to the report, widened in the second quarter. Now, what's the implication? Because you've already said that the GDP actually grew from 6.6 to 6.7%. It's something to cheer about.
Absolutely.
And, of course, the inflation rates dropped. But then we've seen that the lending and deposit rates, the spread between the lending and deposit rates actually widened. So what's the implication of this? The
implication is this, of that is this. You have to now, put that side by side with the growth in money supply. M1, which is narrow money, and M2, which is broad money. M1 increased marginally by 0.02%, but M2 dropped. And the implication of this, putting it side by side with what we've just said in terms of the gap between the lending and deposit rate, meant that the credit that will be available to banks to lend to the private sector and probably government sector is reduced by the availability or reduction in the M2. M2 is broad money. That is the entire money in circulation. The money that banks keep with the CBN, and then their demand deposits that they keep in their own books. So, on the one hand, it has the implication that there is reduced capacity to lend. Then it has the second implication that the interest rate is still fairly up there. So people we contend with high interest rates, and there will still not be enough.
Which is what, actually the Central Bank of Nigeria is trying to see how they can bring down. Because lending to critical sector, lending to any sector whatsoever is very important, because that's how the sectors are going to grow. Now that the federal government is all about agriculture, we have more and more people coming into those banks, banks or other institutions, financial institutions, to collect loans. So would this not stifle the growth of those sectors that we're trying to, as much as possible, because we're trying to diversify from oil? So agriculture right now is in everybody's eyes. So won't this, stifle that growth that we're hoping and expecting to see in the short to medium term?
It's been stifling it. It's not just a new phenomenon. But, from the government side, they believe that you can short circuit this and do some intervention funds, 200 billion and the rest of them. Yeah, they will solve the problem in the short run. But it's not a sustainable medium to long run strategy, because you cannot continue to intervene in markets. It creates its own distortions. The interest rate in the real economy is X, and then we are subsidizing. Basically, that's the meaning of it. We are subsidizing to make sure they have access to money. For me, anything that puts the farmers in a position to have access to funds, I support it. particularly at single-digit rate. It's a good thing, but it's not a sustainable policy drive. So let's take it that it's a temporary situation, and I want to hope that the CBN is also aware of this. Now, going forward, we must be able to find a balance that can create a macro interest rate in the economy where all sectors of the economy can go to the market and take money and do business. That is when we can say we have an operating economy. But now we have intervention in the textile sector, we have in the agric, we have in the SME sector. How many interventions are we going to have in economies? We have so many sectors, and we cannot continue to discriminate from one sector to the other. That is on that side. Still talking about the fiscal sector, about the fiscal and the financial sector. There's a big challenge also in the financial sector, because the assets, the foreign assets they are holding, that's the banks and maybe other institutions within that sector, like discounters and all that, their stock of foreign assets declined. And it was a little significant. Based on the CBN records, about 5.5%. And that decline, limits them from having a lot of assets to be able to lend. But the good thing is that it was compensated for by the central bank's outstanding FGM bonds that stay with them, and that's about 5.6%. So you can see a compensating effect. So that is why on the growth level it's almost flat.
So it wasn't a worrisome trend, because you just said foreign exchange inflow actually dipped by 4.8%, and outflow increased by 97%.
Yeah.
So it's not something we should...
No, I'm not even talking about foreign exchange. I'm talking about the assets that banks
Okay, assets,
hold.
not the exchange.
When we begin to talk about the exchange now, then it means we are going to the external sector, and then...
Okay, so just before we get to, I think...
the fiscal sector.
Now, looking at that report, it also shows that there was a decline in oil revenue receipts, which was below budget estimates. Yeah. What are your thoughts on this?
That is a major development. And honestly, I think Nigeria should really take this very, very seriously. Because if you look at the projected dollar revenues that we had put in the budget for Q2, it has actually, we didn't meet it by about 194%. That is the, that's the gap. So relative to what we budgeted, we were short by 194%. That is extremely significant. Now, if you look at that situation and you juxtapose it with what is happening in the Niger Delta area, where people, all sorts of sundry people just enter into that region and then begin to take Nigeria's crude oil and steal it and disappear into the thin air, as if they were stealing pure water or pin. It's a problem, because if we don't increase dollar revenues into the economy, we are not going to be able to fund the foreign exchange market. And you can see how the central bank has been battling with stabilizing the foreign exchange rate. Even at the official exchange rate, the CBN is battling. CBN is not going to be able to fund the foreign exchange market and stabilize the value of the naira if a lot of unserious people are just taking our crude oil. So now, how does
that affect other sectors? How does that affect the economy generally?
It's affecting the economy by way of this. As the CBN struggles, right? Let me tell you what happens. If the flow of supply of dollars is steady and increasing, CBN has the capacity to support the value of the dollars.
Without breaking a sweat.
If there's a decline in that, CBN must now struggle to see whether they can continue to fund the foreign exchange market. If they cannot, then they go back to the money market and begin to create a tight monetary policy and begin to suck out naira, because you cannot buy dollars in the economy if you don't have naira. CBN knows that, and they have the power to begin to increase their MPR, begin to increase the cash reserve ratio and the rest of it. And we saw that when they increased the CRR by 50% for government deposits. If the situation gets worse, they are going to extend it to the private sector deposit. So, if the CBN cannot, if the government cannot increase the supply of dollars, CBN will be forced to increase the supply of naira. When you decrease the supply of naira in reaction to the decline in supply of dollars, the interest rate will shoot up, because interest rate is the price of money. And when you reduce the supply of money, interest rate must go up. And when that happens, it means we are going to be seeing this kind of interest rate we are seeing in the economy, where people cannot borrow at cheap rates, borrow at 20, 25. It's not sustainable. So we are going to have a problem in the money market. we are going to have problem even in the capital market. And then we are going to have problem in the foreign exchange market. Then on the external sector, we are going to have problem with our reserve level. If you look at the figures the last time, it has gone down.
Yeah.
These are the implications of a few unscrupulous elements, playing with the destiny of the nation and just stealing our commonwealth, and they're getting away with it.
But you see,
it's not a good thing.
Yes, apart from the drop we noticed in oil revenue, we also saw that there was a drop in non-oil revenue receipts.
Yeah, but that's not significant.
Okay.
Because if you look at the composition of the federal government revenue, oil receipts are about 76.5% of the entire federally collected revenue. So anything that happens to the oil receipts, it stabilizes the entire economy and the entire macro variables. So we must understand what the CBN is going through at this time and what the finance minister is going through at this time. Because the finance minister handles the fiscal side of it, while the central bank governor handles the monetary part of it. And they work together. But the challenge for the minister of finance now is that you must continue to fund and the revenues are not coming in. ASU is bringing his own. We have entered the season of strikes. Everybody is asking for more pay and the rest of them. And that's what happens when things begins to go up and people cannot afford